a period of time, I've sat on numerous committees. I currently sit on the STP, the Cancer Alliance, the Planned Care Board, NHS 111 First is being introduced. I'm sitting on the board of that. I've been the Senior Responsible Officer for Restoration and Recovery of Primary Care in Hampshire. Sit on the National Cardiovascular Disease Prevention Group that's looking at what we do with that. So I've sort of got involved in a huge number of things as well as being in my practice. So at the moment, a lot of the focus of the work we're doing is about actually how the system recovers from the first, second, and now into phase 3 of COVID. What that means for general practice and representing general practice on numerous meetings to make sure that when people are considering the recovery, they don't forget us. There's a temptation that both nationally and regionally, they look at hospitals and to a lesser extent community, but really forget the challenges that general practice has worked under. As part of that, part of the work I've done for about 6 years, I chaired the commissioning committee within the BMA and was able to engage on a number of things like world-class commissioning, practice-based commissioning, met with government and NHS England and the Department of Health. And then a couple of years ago, out of the blue, I got invited by the Secretary of State to chair a review onto the future or revitalising the partnership model of general practice. So I spent 6 months working with the department, with NHS England, with the college and the GPC, and going around the country meeting loads of GPs, seeing some amazing stuff, seeing some really challenging stuff, and actually some areas which were really struggling, which was a huge privilege. And out of that, I wrote a report for the Secretary of State with a number of recommendations to try and look at not just the partnership model and how that suited partners, but also how that benefited salary doctors, locums, practice managers, the wider practice team. But actually one of the key bits was also part of the system. So, I mean, just briefly, you know, just one of the many things we looked at was something called GP fellowships, which NHS England pinched the idea and then put it in their long-term plan. Primary care networks were being developed as sort of hospital facing to sort out admission avoidance and referrals and sort the hospital out, because that's what was needed. And through the partnership review, it wasn't just the partnership review, but working with the college and the BMA, we persuaded NHS England to look at a much broader vision, which was if you want primary care networks to work, they've got to be owned by practices, and practices aren't going to sign up to doing more work for secondary care. They really need to be supporting general practice and making a difference going forward, which then led on to things like recruitment and retention. How do we get younger doctors into substantive posts? How do we retain the older doctors? But also then I went to number 10 and to the Treasury to argue about more resources going into general practice. And clearly part of that, they weren't going to put any more money into the global sum, because their view was general practice would just put the money in their pockets and walk away and just earn more money. So to get transformation, to get increased workforce, it took a bit of discussion and persuasion by myself and others. The BMA were supportive and the college, which is how we managed to get £1.5 billion extra to go into general practice through primary care networks. And about the same time, Theresa May was listening to, and her health advisors, to a lot of the things we were saying, and were seen as a sort of trusted voice to put the £4.5 billion into primary and community care. So it was quite an interesting time to do it. The report was well received, and then nothing much happened, to my huge disappointment. But over a period of 12 to 18 months, and one of the things you learn in some of these roles is that some of them are a bit more slow burn. I want everything done yesterday, or preferably the day before. But suddenly, 12 months later, the new contract came out, and about the 15 recommendations, major recommendations I made in the partnership review, surprise, surprise, have all come through virtually within the new contract changes. So at the moment, you know, part of what I'm trying to do is actually support general practice, make sure we have a seat at the table, make sure we have influence on where things are going. And hopefully Hannah might back some of that up in a minute and not just undermine everything I've just said. But, you know, we are working more closely with the hospitals. The system is listening to general practice. For Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, general practice and PCNs are seen the delivery vehicle of choice. Even the chief execs in the hospital are saying we need to invest more in community and primary care. So those things are already positive. I suppose looking forward, my biggest regret is I think the next 10 years will be one of the most fantastic times for general practice, with the opportunities that are coming. And although I look about 80, I am only 60, and I wish I was 10 years younger, because I would really relish the challenge that is coming your way. But Hannah will do a far better job than I could ever do. So perhaps I'll shut up there and let Hannah speak.
Thanks, Nigel. Hannah, could you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, Nigel, you're very... We're in it together for a long time, yeah. I think, and I think your thing about pitching ideas is actually recommendations on the slide, which I think is what you said, which is, you know, actually much better really than a politician doing it. So I'm Hannah Morgan. I'm a GP. I live in South East Hampshire, basically on the south coast near Hayling Island, and that's where I'm a GP partner. So I qualified last February. Goodness, it feels like a long time ago, but it was 18 months ago now. As a GP, I took a very long route towards qualification. I did 10 years of clinical medicine in secondary care, where I always thought I would be a hospital medic. I trained in Manchester and then did some medicine up there, and then moved to London and did my respiratory registrar jobs in London and Kent, Surrey and Sussex. And after 3 years of medical rep, was actually 2 years, I took my first time out thinking actually I should slow this all down a bit, and did what was then the deanery equivalent of a Darcy leadership fellowship in leadership for clinicians, basically, which was a master's and spending time with a chief exec, and essentially that kind of spurred my interest in leadership and management. And then I went back to clinical medicine for only 6 months before coming out again to work with a senior management team in Brighton, and actually did a big piece of work on organisational culture and integrated care for respiratory, which then made me think actually nor my clinical curiosity nor my kind of spirit of what I wanted to do with my career was in hospital medicine. I really my gaze extended above the hospital walls really, and I decided I wanted to be a GP. So between 2012ish and last year I was doing bits of that and qualifying as a GP and having 3 children. So it took me a while to qualify, but yeah, I then took partnership at my training practice last year, where I do a job share. It was a transitional job share. It's actually equivalent of 5 sessions a week, but it's 6 sessions, but over 40 weeks of the year, which gives me 12 weeks off, because I always knew that I wanted to do something different. And actually then primary care networks were coming along. I started off doing a deanery fellowship for 1 day a week, but dropped that when I was kind of offered and wanted to do the clinical director role for our 3 practice PCN, which is a 30k PCN in Hayling Island and Emsworth. So that really is 1 day a week and on a Tuesday, and I do my GP job 3 days a week most of the time, although it all, to be honest, weaves in and out, especially now. The PCN job is really busy. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
Thank you both. I wondered if we could start in at a slight tangent, but it's we were just talking before we opened up about some of the interesting challenges in primary care at the moment, and understandably flu vaccination drive came up, and the sort of additional challenge that brings. And it led me to wondering, with these place-based challenges, with these challenges for caring for large communities, what scale do we do that at? So Nigel, speaking from an LMC that covers Hampshire, Dorset, I'm sure a large other area that I'm going to forget. It's a huge population of 3,000 odd GPs that you represent. How do you decide what needs to be done at that scale versus what should be more effectively done at a PCN level like Hannah's?
So in a way, it's quite a privilege that we cover such a big area. So we cover a population of about 3.5 million, because we've got really good relationships with the CCGs, the ICSs, the hospitals. To to some extent, I won't say we make the decisions, but we work, there are things we've decided at a Hampshire and Isle of Wight level. There's stuff we've done at a CCG level, and then the stuff we've said, actually, this is better done at a population of 30 to 50,000. So flu's a really good example where, as an LMC, we've done a huge amount of work within the team that work with me in the LMC to look at a flu calculator, to look at guidance, to look at what we need to do in terms of delivering a program, whether that be mass vaccination through a drive-through or through using a school sports hall or something. So we've done that information, we've done that work, and then we've shared it across the 3 counties, and the CCGs have picked it up and said, that's great, can we co-badge this with you? So there's stuff like that you can do. But then when you come down to a system level like Hampshire, I sit on the Hampshire Flu Group, which is then meeting with the chief execs to say, so actually if we're going to vaccinate twice as many people, where are we going to get the vaccine from? What are we going to do about the special groups like pregnant women? We need the hospitals to actually not only say they're going to vaccinate pregnant women, but actually do it. So let's really challenge them on that. And then you could come down to actually at a PCN level, can practices collaborate? At a practice level, what is it you need to put in place? There are a huge number of things. So there's quite a lot of stuff we do as an LMC where we're in the sort of position where we can almost decide at various levels to work at and share that information. And working across 11 acute trusts and 12 CCGs as it was, now they're merging, so we've got less. It's quite easy. So I was on a call in Bournemouth today to say, actually, you're going to do this work in the winter about children presenting with pyrexias, and could they be COVID? Are they going to be something else? So rather than just have the pathway, just to let you know, for the last 6 weeks, we've been working on this in Hampshire, and we've got this really good pathway developing. Why don't you join the Hampshire group, and we can do something that is shared across the whole thing. So it's sort of, you've got to be flexible with it. And I'm really good at stealing people's ideas, and sharing them. And I've got a fantastic team that works in the LMC with me, so I can claim all the credit for all the work they really do.
Thanks, Nigel. Hannah, how does it look from your perspective?
Yeah, I think in a way it's about not working in silo, isn't it, for a lot of this? And actually, I think COVID has really given us a 5-year plus for, move forward, being catalytic really in terms of helping us get information out to people at pace, in terms of using tools, in terms of even like the recorded webinars. I think like the LMC's reach for things has really probably improved. We within our CCG, the practice managers, we used to have a clinical leads meeting that the senior partner or the PCNCDs would go to once a month. And then I think it was a real frustration for about 5 years of how that communication, that information didn't flow out. Whereas now I think there's a webinar, there's 250 people on it, it's recorded, you can watch it at your own pace. So I think that has really helped. I think one of the challenges that actually general practice does a lot of things very well already. And we've got practice managers who've been delivering successful flu campaigns, certainly in our area, for a long time. And actually the populations are quite in the routine. They know in September to call the practice, and they'll hear and they'll get their flu campaign. So I think it's a question of knowing where to innovate, like Nigel says, knowing what are the gaps we need to fill, what is that, but at the same time not changing if you don't need to change, and also not undermining the practice managers and kind of shielding them from workload, because I think they've had a really good time and are really busy now.
Well, can I just build on what Hannah's just said, because I think it comes to the fundamental thing of leadership, which is going into, I often don't think of myself as a medical politician. I just think of myself as a GP who happens to find myself in a role that I still think there's going to be a day when people find out that actually I shouldn't be here really. But traditionally, medical politics has been about sort of confrontation and almost being the union and fighting with people, which in my experience doesn't often get you very far. you can win the battle and lose the war. And actually, if you do get into fights, usually there's two people that lose, not one winner and one loser. And what I've learned over many years, but has really come to the fore in COVID, is that if a lot of people, or it is easy in medical politics to say the answer is no. Now, what's the question? Rather than when somebody asks you something to say yes, but. And if you say yes, but, then you're obliged to find a solution. And I probably have a few skills, and one of the skills I have is finding solutions. So if you give me a problem, I'll come up with a solution for you. And certainly as an organisation, that's very much how we've operated. And by doing that, and we do occasionally stamp our feet and say no and say this is wholly unacceptable. And by doing it occasionally, then hospitals, CCGs respect and trust what we're saying, so they will listen to us, and you have greater influence. So during COVID, we developed really good relationships. We had reasonable relationships with the hospital before, but they're even better now. And we've been working closely with the medical directors, with the chief execs, with the CCGs, having joint meetings, and have actually solved a huge number of challenges that we wouldn't have done before. And actually, to get a seat at the table, you've got to have people's trust and respect. And rather than going on 300 leadership courses and being told all the gobbledygook, dare I say, a lot of it is about creating those relationships, developing trust, and actually saying things that you don't have to say the popular thing or say the thing that everybody wants to listen or wants to hear necessarily. Sometimes you say things and people will come back to you. I was in a meeting on Tuesday about 111 first, which is potentially controversial, and I gave some fairly full and frank views. And somebody contacted me after, can I have a chat to you? And they said, I really like what you said, because actually what you didn't say was, no, that can't happen. You said, these are the risks and these are how you mitigate the risks. So I think in terms of, what I've seen, and I would wholly commend Hannah for all the work she's done, because the PCNs have matured probably 2 to 3 years in the last 6 months. And what's really happened is many of the CDs have really stood up to the plate and become local leaders, pulled their local practices together to work collaboratively, have delivered way beyond what the resources they've got available. And that puts them in a really good stead as we go forward to not only gain extra resources, but gain the trust of their local community, of other providers who want to work with them. But we've just got to be careful they don't just get overwhelmed.
Yeah. And I think what builds that trust is actually delivering, isn't it? Is speaking out, but also delivering. So I think that's where COVID has been really helpful, that we've shown that we can collaborate when we need to. And I think that's what also helps the practices with the agility, that we're not taking away, by collaborating, we're not taking away the agility. Like for our hot hub, for example, we set up our hot hub, which is set up over one proportionate shared staffing basis with no extra costs apart from the infrastructure, and the management was extra, but the GP covering it was just practices on proportionate share. And being able to turn that around in kind of 2 weeks was really, it was difficult. It wasn't easy to get all the practices to agree, but I'm not the only person that did that. Lots of other people, Anna on the call, I know, did that in her area of North Hampshire. But I think it has shown us that. And with flu, I think, we know that, the LMC will pull together lots of the solutions that we will use depending on what the different models are. So we don't need to do everything on our own small practice level, or at PCN level, or at 2,000, 100,000 level, or at county size. But we do it when we need to. And I think that's what COVID has given people a real degree of confidence, I think, in that.
And that's where you've got to, doing the sort of role in LMC, you've got to keep your finger on the pulse, because at one time I was watching the national LMC list server and the GPC list server, who were sort of anti-hot and cold sites. This is appalling, it should be stopped. And on the other hand, I was seeing these amazing clinical directors who were getting on with their practices, saying, actually, if we're going to manage this safely, we need to create hot and cold sites, and we'll do it this way with very little resource. And actually, you know, when you sit there at the LNC, I found myself in the CDs camp, not some of the LMCs that were very opposed to what was going on. And that's where sometimes you have to do what you think's right, rather than necessarily follow the crowd or do what you think's popular.
Thanks, Nigel. You both talked a bit about representing organisations of different scales, and I guess there's credibility to the group you're representing general practice towards, so that might be credibility to the trusts, but you have to have sort of credibility within your own team, don't you, to have the confidence to stand up and do that. And Hannah, I wondered if I could ask you, as a GP trainee, you know, I'm looking to CCT as not a million years away, and I wonder how you do that as a newly minted GP. You just become a partner, and then you step up, and now you're trying to create the relationships within your network and representing that network outside as well. And then COVID comes along as well. You know, how have you found that? Proudest moments, biggest challenges, how's that been for you?
So I think, you know, I won't lie, it's felt quite hard at times. I do think that being a PCNCD is what I kind of almost part of what I came into general practice to do. You know, it sounds a bit, but improving the health of a population was really important part of why I moved over. So I've always, it was a bit easier when people weren't expecting that much of me. In the beginning, it was, you know, I think lots of the GPs thought, oh, it's a bit of fun, you know, whereas actually, and then we had some quite awkward conversations during the CD years where it was a bit like, oh, good, do you think you're our leader? You know, and then they kind of almost realised that I was in a position of leadership, you know, seen to be in that position by certainly externally for our practices. And so that was difficult, although I have to say I have felt incredibly supported. We haven't always agreed. I think one thing about COVID that's been extraordinary is just how little we knew about it. You know, I was arguing, you know, in a constructive way with my partners about what was going to be viable. You know, when they talked about putting plastic screens up for reception and using surgical face masks for a new influenza type illness, I'd come out of respiratory going, that will not cut it. You know, don't be ridiculous. We're not going to be wearing it. And then here we are, you know, with perspex screens and wearing surgical face masks, and that is supposed to be okay, you know. So I think that we're learning as we go, and I think actually if you're honest and people know that you're working hard and trying to do your best, then that actually is almost all that people actually expect of you. So I mean, I have the volume of communication has been challenging. I found that you know, some things like Teams have been absolutely brilliant, and I really welcome them, and have had to kind of get a lot of our GPs on them and our teams on them, but finding the balance of shielding people. I think part of the PCN role from the beginning has been sieving the information down and amplifying their voices up as to what matters and what their priorities are. So I think that is still my role. Sieving during COVID has actually been another challenge, but almost it's been helped because other people are reading information like they never would read. I mean, it was one success I found trying to get our GPs on email, some of them, whereas now they're all on email or reading Teams, you know. So in that way, it's been really helpful. I have had to look after my well-being. Like, I think it's important to say that, you know, for the first 3 months, not 3 months, it all blurs into one now, but for the first few weeks, I was kind of passing on all this well-being information to our patients and teams and not really doing it myself. And I have started monthly coaching now, which has been really helpful for me, just in terms of just simple things like breathing and exercising and, you know, taking a break. And I think that's been really important because I was putting in a lot of, like everyone, I think we were all putting in a lot of hours, but I think I care about what people think about me. I think we all do, don't we? And it has been difficult when people have disagreed with things, but it's then nice if they turn around and say, I'm sorry, Hannah, I was wrong. I thought that was a terrible idea, but actually it's worked out fine. And I think they appreciate it when I say, I'm really sorry you were right, you know, that I was wrong. And so I think it's been good. I have to say, I feel really good after having a really good break for the summer, because I know that's difficult for everyone, but it's very rare for me to do that and to turn off everything, but it was really important. But I think it's been a fantastic experience, to be honest.
Thanks. It sounds like it has been difficult, and I'm full of admiration for how you've managed it. I wondered, Nigel's mentioned already the importance of relationships, and it comes up often when we talk about this. And I guess partnership working is throughout the system, isn't it? And it's all based on relationships, but it can feel a bit woolly. What does it mean to generate good relationships or form strong relationships? What have you found? What practical ways have you found for doing that locally at the PCN level?
Within for me as a PCN CD. So actually for a long time, so since PCN started kind of last July, we've had monthly meetings with our CCG and community teams. And at that meeting, we started, a WhatsApp group that was not really used in COVID, but actually those monthly meetings did help us really form relationships with the finance team, with all the clinical commissioners. Since before COVID, probably 12 months now, at least, well, maybe 9 months, we've had one of the consultants be the kind of primary care link and be on a WhatsApp group with us, and that's been brilliant. Getting to know the CD. So during COVID, those meetings very much went to daily, and then every other day, kind of an hour meeting at lunchtime. Now they've cut back to once or twice a week, but the CD meetings have been every week still. That has been really good. So I think just knowing people well enough to be able to speak honestly, for them to know that you've got, it's that Amy Emerson's psychological safety bit, really, that you can speak just what's on your mind, and people know you well enough to be able to probe a bit deeper. And the other thing that I think's really helped now is that because the CDs all know each other, the hospital really listen to us. So if we say, oh, I'm not sure about this, or I've noticed this, and then suddenly another 8 people agree, then actually that's all of primary care agreeing, which is a big difference, I think, for them. Like they say that we can form a mandate quite quickly. We did have team coaching, actually. I used Hannah Miller from the strengths coaching, and I organised that, which actually I'd been wanting to do that for ages, but I hadn't had enough courage to say to the other CDs, should we do it? And actually all of them but one of the 12 locally did it, which I was really pleased with, and that's really helped, because I think just building trust is what is important. I'm quite transparent with things. Not everyone is quite the same, and it is important with GP partnerships that there's always a bit of business sensitivity about things, but I think we've pushed quite heavily for transparency, and that's paying off massively. I think you have to do it consciously.
Thank you. Hannah in the chat, Hannah Cusson has put on a hashtag for looking out for coaching there, and has said thanks for talking about. I think we don't talk about that need to look after yourself often, do we? And it's really good of you to bring that up, because it must have been really tough, as it has been for lots of people. But I think holding the responsibility of that PCM working as well is an extra burden.
Yeah, and we get it's part of this PCM. We get a organisation development budget with a CD budget of £3,000 a year. So if NHS England didn't think that clinical directors would need to develop personally in their role, they wouldn't give the money for it. So I think we have a duty to spend it and look after ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, especially after people like Nigel have fought so hard to get that kind of budget.
It's free now for primary care leaders, as Hannah. So it's brilliant. So I would recommend it to everyone.
Hannah's also asked a question around sort of the fear of the goalposts moving, and I hear that locally amongst the network that I'm part of. The fear of, well, why would I risk investing a lot of energy and effort into meeting these X criteria when they might just be changed in a few years? And how have you managed that or held that locally?
Look, we live in uncertain times. The goalposts are always moving. I personally think you need, in life we look at, nothing is risk-free. So even crossing the road, you assess the risks and go forward. I think some of the stuff recently about the risks in the future, people have put held beliefs which are incorrect as facts for the future. So all the stuff around the contract, there's this belief that NHS England and the Department of Health are out to get us. They hate GPs, they want to destroy general practice. I can tell you with 100% certainty that nothing could be further from the truth. Having spent 6 months working in the Department of Health, going, as I said, to the Treasury, to number 10, spending quite a lot of time in NHS England, they absolutely want general practice to work. They have concerns about it. So the partnership model, there are some people who think we're too free and we're not held to account enough as you would as an employee. There are those that think incorrectly that they can't see what we're delivering like they can the hospital trust because they've got all the activity data and finished consultant episodes, admissions, 4-hour trolley rate. They've got all sorts of data they can look at, most of which is meaningless. But I can absolutely assure you that they recognise, the people who matter, that the main reason why the NHS functions as well as it does, despite what people says, the outcomes we get are better than many other health systems in the world, is because of the system of general practice. And if general practice ceased to function, the rest of the health service would implode, absolutely no doubt. And right up to Simon Stephens acknowledges that and realises that. So this idea that the goalposts are changing, well, they are for everybody. Whatever job you do, the goalposts are always changing because what the world changes, and it's changed more in the last 4 or 5 months than any time for a number of years, certainly in my career. But you also have to make your own judgments, and at times we portray general practice as being small businesses who can manage risk, who can implement change at speed, we can move things. Well, yeah, but we can't have it always. So sometimes as GPs, we're a bit precious. We want absolute total protection, but we want all the freedom as well. Now, I would say, would I go into partnership now? Absolutely. Would I see it as a major risk? No, I wouldn't. When I was at some of your stage, so I became a partner in 1987, which was probably before some of you were born, I had never heard of due diligence. I have to say, I didn't look at the practice accounts. I didn't look at the partnership agreement. I was just really grateful to have got a job. Now, I wouldn't advise anybody to do that nowadays. You're much wiser than I was. But, the risks of being a partner or working for general practice are, I look at other professions where they take far more business risks than we do in general practice. So, am I worried about the goalpost moving? Not particularly. I think if you look at the GP contract we've got now compared to what was facing PCNs and everybody else coming up to Christmas time, and the new service specifications, which would have been a disaster. But many people told NHS England and the government, and I certainly told Matt Hancock that through his staff that if you trust what I say, this is going to go down like a lead balloon, which it did. But they came back with a much better offer. But that was because people recognised what the risks were and persuaded government to put significantly more resources in, which we need to make best use of. So, the goalposts are always going to change. If you want them to stay where they are, some of us like change, some of us don't like change, but it's always going to be a bit of a moving feast. You've got to make sure you've got your eyes on the ball and keep hitting the target.
Yeah. That's what's hard, is it? I mean, one of the hardest conversations I had with my practices, they were like, Hannah, you want to change things, and we don't want change. And I was like, well, I can't not promise change is the only thing actually I can promise you in this. Things are going to change. And I think the thing is that so much good is changing as well. So like the additional roles reimbursement scheme for PCNs changed last, December or whenever they, from us having to put in extra money to getting it 100% reimbursed, and our CCG locally has now said we can get all of our extra costs as long as we put it in that pot, which is a complete game changer for us in terms of, by Christmas we'll have 11 new members of staff, professional kind of clinical staff working in our 3 practices, which is a huge amount of time. And actually, even if I'd have had to get the 30%, I don't think I would have been able to do that. So I think the change goes in a lot of directions, but you've also got to really know the detail. And I think that's another thing that's been important, and I think has given us the authority a bit as PTNCDs, is I think people have realised that all that reading of all the detail has actually paid off now. I think Sonali put so yeah, I think to grasp the opportunities, you kind of almost have to know about them. But the relationships and the comms and all the WhatsApp groups have been amazingly helpful with that. Sonali put a thing in the chat about salaried opportunities in PCNs, and I think it is a really important point that, you know, PCNs are the footprint of all of the new integrated care system, but other people have put about the CCGs merging. Well, the CCGs are all, well, a lot of them are merging, but actually PCNs should be coming up and being the local kind of thing at place. And I think that's where, certainly, I think that's a bit of the to-do list of the next 6 months, is that as PCNs, we've got to formalise some of those working relationships with each other, so that we can get our kind of negotiating right, I think. And in terms of how we work with salaried staff, I think it's really important that we do this. So there's a whole load of new roles coming out in primary care, which I think will be brilliant for portfolio working, you know, educational roles, fellowship, mentoring roles, different opportunities that will give people leadership roles, so leading different projects within the PCNs, that I would love to be able to help people develop portfolio jobs. One of the things that is hard is just how you advertise jobs. I keep challenging it with our CCG, because obviously they forward things to the practice managers that then forward them on, but it doesn't feel particularly robust to me. So I would like to get, but it's really important for equality and diversity, and I also think it's really important for our jobs. I don't know about everyone else, but I've certainly found that I loved face-to-face consulting, and one thing that was really hard about COVID was missing that. It was nice when the workload got a bit easier, I won't lie about that, but I still really miss the face-to-face consulting, and I find it hard doing a kind of 9-hour day staring at the screen all day with my brain whirring through clinical stuff, which I still find challenging. Some of my more experienced colleagues find the clinical stuff really easy, so I don't think they have that brain activity while they're staring at the screen. I don't know, but I think variation in our jobs is going to be really important, and I think we've got a role to be quite playful about that over the next 6 months, because only we can work out what our jobs look like. So I think
Hannah, can I take you back to changing things?
Oh yeah.
So in my practice, they used to say to me, "We're very happy you go out and do things, but please don't go and visit anywhere else, because every time you do, you come back and you want to change things, and we can't change anymore." And I often thought about it, and I am really good at picking up ideas, I think. So I did come back with lots of ideas, and then I started developing the skills on how I could persuade them to do things differently. And actually, one of the skills I learned was one of my partners would always block things. He'd always say no to everything. And then after a couple of years, some of my partners recognized that I got a lot of change through, and then they wondered how I'd managed to. And I explained to them that this one blocking partner, what I used to do was think about what I wanted to bring up at a partnership meeting, and I'd talk to him about it beforehand. And then we went to the meeting, he'd already knew what was coming up, and he actually was usually generally supportive. So rather than blocking it, he was supporting it. So the other partners who presented things for the first time at the partnership meeting had their ideas blocked, and all mine went through. So you've got to be a bit subtle sometimes about how you get change, but how you get change is not something that just happens, because quite often we are quite conservative with a small c and not necessarily like change, and we can think of it, we're intelligent enough that we can bring 1,000,001 reasons why that shouldn't happen or that shouldn't change, rather than, yeah, actually let's go with that and try it and risk failure, which isn't a problem, because we're going to learn by that.
Nigel, can I pick up on that? Because one thing I noticed looking at political parties and thinking myself about representative positions is that they tend to favour conservative behaviour, Politicians are typically risk averse because they don't want to offend the most sensitive voter. And I can see that, as a GP leader, GPs are a very heterogeneous group, and the risk of offending groups must be relatively high. So how do you stop yourself just becoming an incredibly timid and risk-averse leader when trying to represent, but also keep behind you the sort of groundswell of support that you need to be effective and impactful?
So I think that's a really interesting question. So I don't think it's something you can sort of plan to do, but I've always found that if you're honest, if you're open and transparent, you listen and learn, you communicate, you talk to people, you look for people who you respect, not always the people, as I said before, who say the popular things. And out of that, you develop a fairly strong network of people you trust. I think probably as I've got older and a bit more experienced, I'm better at listening to the people who are very negative without taking it personally, but taking their views on board. My wife used to keep saying to me that anybody that didn't agree with me, I used to say they just don't understand. Whereas now I recognise they do understand, but hold a different view to me. So, and I think that's where doing the leadership roles, if you do them and you're prepared to stand up and say what you believe in, then, so long as you're not way out on a limb, and I think that's a bit of sort of benchmarking yourself and sense checking, that is helpful. But I think at times you've just got to be prepared to say the unpopular things. And I have found on the GPC that there's 80 people who sit on the committee, and sometimes I feel like I'm a lone voice, that I feel I'm reasonably moderate and reasonably sensible and can see both sides of an argument and have steered a particular way. And, people have then been quite critical and have been a bit personal about things I've said. And then what is deeply frustrating is people don't say it at the meeting and they come out afterwards and say, oh yeah, we totally agree with you. But you think, well, why didn't you say it there? But, you put your head above the parapet, you get it, you might get your head shot off. And I think I'd go back to what Hannah said. I'm actually quite sensitive, contrary to popular belief. And I think when people say things that are personal, it's hurtful. And I think this idea that we can go into a world of medical politics or anything else and we've got tough skin and it doesn't really matter is not true. I know lots of leaders who are deeply affected by things that people say. So, you have to be honest to yourself. And I think if you will all know, if you're talking at a meeting, you can sense if the audience is with you or isn't with you. And again, when you're doing some of these things, you've got to know when it's the time to say things and when it's the time not to, and not to have arguments with people, but try and have discussions with people. And you can often persuade people if your beliefs are not seen to be extreme. But I think there is a risk you become vanilla and just don't say anything, or you just become so moderate in your views that you're not prepared to rock the boat at all. And sometimes I think it is worth rocking the boat a bit because it actually creates quite good debate and discussion. And I've been in the last probably 4 or 5 years experienced a number of really difficult situations which have been created by all sorts of reasons. And it's then, how do you get yourself out of that? Do you just keep digging till you dig a deeper hole, or is there a solution? And I think the real skill of leadership is when you're in those difficult situations, can you see a clear way forward, and can you take people with you?
Nigel, thank you so much. There's so much to unpack in that. I'm glad we've got 15 more minutes so we don't have to finish on having your head shot off above the parapet though. But clearly, although it must be hard, and I imagine it's harder now with social media. In some ways, it's easier to keep a sense of the pulse of what's happening in general practice. But just like in those conference rooms, people find it much easier to sling dirt than stand up and support, don't they, in that setting? So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Miraj has asked, one for both of you. It can be really hard. It can sometimes see that there are very familiar faces coming up in these GP leadership roles. CCG, all the top bods from the PCTs came into the CCGs, and then we set up PCNs, and in lots of areas, people have left CCGs to take up PCN CD roles, and it can seem hard to see where new GPs fit into this, but clearly there are some wonderful role models from people doing it. Hannah, lots of people in the next gen community who have stepped up to these new CD roles. How can you both just offer a few thoughts on how to encourage, relatively early career GPs to sort of find these roles and step up to them?
Yeah.
So don't define what you want to do. Just look and take the opportunities. Early on in my career, I was a fund holding lead in my practice, and we had a management consultant who sat me down and asked me what my career path was going to be. And I asked him what he meant by it. And he said, well, where are you going to be in 5 years' time? So I said, well, here. No, what job are you going to do? I said, I haven't got a clue. And, every year I could think the same, and I don't know what opportunities will come next year. So some of it is, if you're really interested, try different things, and you'll find that doors will start opening. And if it's something you don't enjoy, or it's not taking you anywhere, close it down, and don't be afraid to step away from it. But if you decide now you've newly qualified and you want to be the clinical lead of a CCG, you probably won't get there, because it's not that sort of role in a way. What will happen is you'll go off and do something, over here working, in something or other, and then over there you'll work with the LMC, and then people will look and see you've got experience, and you'll just the doors will just start opening. I mean, in the last 10 years, I've probably turned down 10 times as many roles as the ones I've taken on. I'm not very good at saying no, but you'll just find if you just gain some, broader experience, it will just happen. What I would say is I think PCNs and next generation have created a completely different mindset. So for the 42 PCNs in Hampshire and the 85 I cover, there are very few who've got the usual suspects as the CDs. Nearly all of them have got different people, or there's quite a lot of younger GPs who've stood up, and like Hannah, doing a fantastic job, because there is a risk people towards their end of the career are looking for something that's a bit of a cushy role. That's probably being a bit cruel to some of my colleagues. But if you want to pursue not just a leadership, but doing things differently, there are more opportunities now than there have ever been.
Thank you.
I think it's kind of the easiest time, but almost the hardest time for these roles. In terms of, I qualified a long time ago, but
not that long ago, Hannah.
Well, in 2003, nearly every job was in the back of the BMJ. That's where you looked for a job, or I don't know what it's like in meds, in other, general practice then. But what is hard is that a lot of stuff actually isn't advertised. And again, I think it will change because of the need for diversity and equality, and I think it is really important. But my tips would be, decide what interests you. What do you want to do? Do you know what you want to do? Is it something clinical? Is it something as a break? Is it something to do with workforce? Is it something to do where you learn QI? Is it something where you learn a bit more about how the LMC works? And then decide how much capacity you've got. So every PCN will be trying to build its infrastructure at the moment. So every PCN will be looking for GP leads. Last year in the contract, when it first came out in draft, every single spec needed a GP lead attached to it. That went out when they negotiated it, because I think everyone realised it's very hard to ask GPs to do anything extra at the moment. But there's certainly, most PCNs will have leads that they need for their QI projects, for their learning disability projects. This year, that probably has already been defined, although the work's just getting going. So you can probably get into that. But there will be leads needed for lots of different things. So I would say, decide what your capacity is. Have you got half a day a week? Have you got 1 day a month? The Royal College advertise loads of different jobs. So there are and then talk to the leaders, because if there isn't a job exists, I bet someone would create one for you if you know what you want to do. I think.
Can I also say, sometimes it's worth doing unpaid roles?
Yeah.
So the risk is I'm not doing that unless they pay me. And I've done a number of things, and I'm still doing a number of things that I don't get paid for, but the LMC pays me well. Thankfully, I got paid well as a GP, and there are some things I did because I enjoyed doing them and I found them really rewarding. And unbeknown to me, they opened numerous numbers of doors. And actually, I've turned down several very lucrative contracts that I could have had with private companies because I actually wasn't really interested in the money. I was more interested in the work and what I did. So, I'm not suggesting you all go and do pro bono work for nothing for everything, but sometimes there are some of these roles which it's just worth doing because it's worth doing it.
And I think it's one of those things that I certainly have to shrug. It's try and let that water slip off my back from kind of how unfair it felt. Certainly my education fellowship was really poorly paid for a qualified GP. And I almost felt, was I being unjust in taking the job in terms of making them feel that it was actually a viable opportunity. But I felt the same as Nigel. My partnership earnings balanced it all out. It had a study budget. It meant that I went and learned some stuff. And I think it's really important that you do see. So I certainly have a budget of what I need to bring in to my household, in terms of I do invest in my career. I spend money on going to conferences and, doing work for free because I did a bit with the people plan that was not paid, but it was great to see how that was done. And
Sorry, Anna.
No, yeah, those pieces of work come along, and I think it's important that we knock it and we say that wasn't advertised, that wasn't paid, and just kind of on the mental chalkboard and talk about it with each other in terms of equality and diversity, in improving that in the future. But also, that is the way the world goes round, and you gain experience from it.
I mean, when I did the partnership review, the Department of Health paid some backfill, but actually the 6 month I did it cost me probably about £5,000. Do I resent or regret? Not at all. I do it again like a shot because I got so much out of it personally. It was really challenging and really difficult, but I really enjoyed doing it, and it was very rewarding for lots of stuff that you didn't get paid for doing. And what was also remarkable, I created a number of groups that worked together, and not a single person was paid for doing it. And lots of people gave up their time, including some LMCs who organised meetings, which I came and talked at, and got loads of people to various things, and nobody asked for any money. So there's lots of stuff that can be done in that way as well. But you mustn't take goodwill for granted, which sometimes organisations do, like the NHS can do.
Yeah, and I think in primary care we've got a long way to go in kind of valuing our worth and counting our time. And I think, it's important to mentally note it, isn't it? But
I think it's really interesting as well. It's the other side of general practice being paid for as it is. So I think we are more mindful of it than perhaps some of our hospital colleagues who are paid a salary for, XPAs, and that stuff is sort of tied up and blurred in with it. It's maybe it's a bit clearer for GPs when we're paid on this sort of sessional way. And Sonali raised a really important point that whilst they might be important, it's important also just for those that are offering them particularly to be cautious that we're not inadvertently widening a gender and an ethnicity pay gap, because I think coming back to Hannah's point on transparency of these roles and how available they are to different GPs, and I suspect there's something in there around widening the opportunities to salaried and locum GPs as well. We're coming towards the end of our time. Can I ask you both a quick question? Coming back to something that Hannah Casson asked at the very beginning, which is, would you both, COVID-19 has been a time of great change in general practice, and we're still seeing that. Workload is crazy at the moment, isn't it? But is now the time to be looking at partnership? You're both obviously advocates of the model. You've both been partners and speak very positively of it. But is now the time, or should people be waiting to see where we go over the next 12 months?
Absolutely not wait. If you want to, why not get in there? If you're in there as a partner, you can lead it, even if it's within a leadership team. You have influence, you can do all the things that you want to do. I don't get the, well, let's sit on the sidelines and watch everybody else play with the football and then I'll decide later what to do. Why not get involved? Yeah, the workload is high, but the workload has always been high. Part of what we're trying to do at the moment through PCNs and other is to expand the workforce. So to get more additional roles, get more GPs back. If we make general practice a better place to work, we'll expand the workforce. So, if I was in your position now, would I be looking for partnership? Absolutely, yes, I would. I was actually training to be an orthopaedic surgeon before I saw the light like Hannah did and came into general practice. I'd be much richer probably if I was an orthopaedic surgeon, but I wouldn't be as happy as I am. So yeah, I think it is a really good time to move into partnerships. I think not all partnerships are the same, and I would look carefully before I jumped into it. But I think there's lots of opportunities out there for the next generation, not only in terms of the clinical bits, but also in terms of the wider bits as you go forward. But I don't think there's anything wrong with people looking at salaried roles for a bit because they're not ready to go into partnership, and that commitment that there is to do with if you're a partner in a practice. So I think there are varieties there, and I think it comes back to what Hannah said earlier about portfolio careers. I think there's more opportunity to be a partner for 6 sessions a week and do 2 sessions a week doing something completely different. And I think that's also partly what's made my career so enjoyable, is that I've had that opportunity to spend 2 days a week doing medical politics, or whatever you want to call it, for probably 20 years, and work 3 days a week in my practice.
I think it's still a great time to go into partnership if it's the right thing for you at that time. I think it's actually quite a complicated decision, often based on how prepared you are to settle in an area, take some of those financial risks. But actually the financial risks aren't that high if you understand the accounts. And I think certainly I know like Wessex LMC have worked really hard doing the Prepare for Partnership course to make sure that people really do feel like they're going into it with open eyes. And I think doing that is really important. I think gone are the days where it's there's still a bit of status associated with it, isn't it? There was a comment at the RCG about why we still introduce ourselves as GP partners, not GPs, and I think we should recognise that, really. But I think a GP is a GP. It's whether it's right for you. I think for me, it gives you a decision-making bit for the business. It gives you a kind of long-standing view for the community. So for me, it's often financially incentivized. So, and certainly even with COVID, the GP income has been very well protected, I understand, by NHS England, so that COVID doesn't impact. And Nigel's like, trust Nigel. Look at Nigel's face. I'm sure he will do his very best to protect our income as partners. So I think if you feel it's right, then look at fit. Fit is really important, but I think people's personalities and how they react under stress has come out a lot under COVID. So you'll probably have a good idea of how people are during COVID, in terms of whether you would fit in as relationships.
And certainly one of the things we'd say to practices and to partnerships is they need to make it attractive to get you to join them. So whereas before the boot was on the partnership foot to sort of, well, join us and this is what you'll get. It's more now, just think a bit more innovatively about, if you're going to attract partners, what is it going to attract them? You need to be more flexible. You need to think a bit more laterally. And I think with the new GP fellowships that have been announced and how we're going to work that gives another aspect to it, with some of the other things about the new to partnership scheme. And we're looking to develop the business training for that. So I think there's a whole lot of things there that makes that sort of balance between what you want to do and where you are. And the good practices will thrive, and they'll, I know practices who've got queues of GPs wanting to join them, and there are others who can't recruit. And sometimes you need to look and say, why can't you recruit? And why does that practice down the road have no problem getting people at all?
Yeah. Thank you both so much. It's been a really great conversation. We've heard really practical ideas on how to form relationships and how to generate a sense of personal credibility when leading at quite large scales, and some really positive words around partnership and the prospects for general practice as a business. I think it was Nick Harding that said people join organisations because of the values and leave because of their line manager or team members. So I guess that's what Hannah was talking about in terms of finding the right fit. It's always been important, but perhaps more so now than ever. Loads of great comments and questions on the thread that we haven't had a chance to ask, but I want to respect Hannah and Nigel's time and yours. So if there's anything on there that I can pick off and share with Hannah and Nigel later, I'll do that and share it on our next gen bulletin in September. So they haven't been wasted, questions or reflections. Thank you for joining in. It's been really great to see so many participants and smiling faces too. I've put the feedback form on there, and I'll do the same again. I'll do it again in just a second. But thank you all for giving up your time this evening. A special thank you to Nigel and Hannah for the time this evening, but also just for being such amazing advocates for general practice and supporters of Next Generation GP over the last few years. We've really, really valued that. And it's really special to have you as guests tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I think it's a real honour and privilege that anybody wants to listen to me at this time of night. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, ditto to that.
Great. Thank you both.
Thanks all.